From the News Channel 5 Network, this is SportsLine.
Hey there, SportsLine on your television. Steve Layman here with you. Glad you are here with us on this Monday night on News Channel 5 Plus. Great to be here with you tonight. We've got plenty of topics to talk about. College football getting worked up and ready to go. SEC Media Days last week. You've got the Big 12 going this week. ACC went over the weekend. OVC is next week. Conference USA comes up later this week. So a lot of things going on right now. We can discuss that coming up here on the program tonight, 737-7767. We're down to 11 days on our countdown to training camp with the Titans. So many things to discuss with them as well. We can do that as well tonight on the program. Plus an interesting feature that we did last night on the Electric Power Company Sunday Sports Central about the relationship between a former Navy SEAL and the Independence High School football team. I think it's interesting. Stick around and check that out. Plus, John Burton sat down TSU head coach Rod Reed. So hear from the man in charge of the Big Blue coming up on the program tonight as well. But first, I want to talk about something that happened yesterday across the pond early in the morning. The Wimbledon Gentlemen's Final. Roger Federer taking on Marin Cilic. And this, frankly, was a rout of a match. But the significance of what happened yesterday, I think, is very large. Roger Federer got his 19th career Grand Slam title. That is the most all-time. Second on that list is Rafael Nadal, who's got 15. They both have passed Pete Sampras, who was the all-time Grand Slams leader with 14. Federer also got his 8th Wimbledon title, which puts him ahead of both William Renshaw and Pete Sampras for the most all-time titles at the All England Club. He also became the oldest man to win a Wimbledon title, 35 years of age, just 3 weeks shy of his 36th birthday. And he's the third oldest man to win any Grand Slam title. What he has done throughout his career is completely remarkable. And I think his performance this year, winning the Australian Open, winning at Indian Wells, winning in Miami, coming back and winning Wimbledon. He's won 2 of the 3 Grand Slams this year, and the only one he didn't win, he didn't even compete in. He took the clay season off at 35. I think this cements his legacy, not just as the greatest tennis player of all time, but I think Roger Federer very much deserves in the conversation of greatest athletes of this generation and, frankly, all time. Curious on your thoughts on that tonight, 737-7767. But I want to dig into this a little bit more. He is absolutely dominating a sport that is in its peak right now. And sometimes we maybe overlook this here in the United States because we haven't had a real champion since Pete Sampras or Andre Agassi. We haven't had those guys at the top. But the top of men's tennis right now is as good as any sport going. When you talk about Federer, Nadal, Novak Djokovic, and Andy Murray, those 4 have been utterly dominant. And you take them right now in their primes going against one another, they always deliver on the biggest stage. And Federer has existed in that environment against some of the other all-time greats in his sport, and he's excelled. So 19 Grand Slam titles in a sport that has been as good as any here lately. He's done it on all surfaces. He has been incredibly consistent when you look at the streaks of finals, semifinals, quarterfinals. He owns all of those records. He now has 1,011 career wins. He has 90-some titles. He has broken essentially every record that there is to be broken in men's tennis. Why don't more people talk about him as the all-time great athlete, or one of the all-time great athletes, at least in the discussion? And I think it's largely because of the American bias And then the other part of it too is this knock on tennis maybe being kind of a country club sport, or that the best athletes in the world don't necessarily play it. I think that is false, in the sense that there is no sport that is as taxing and physical on your body than playing a Grand Slam tennis match. Now, there are days like yesterday when he just completely smokes Marin Cilic off the court, which isn't as taxing as maybe playing a Stanley Cup final hockey game, for instance, or an NFL game on a Sunday, in length or physicality and brutality. But some of these matches that these guys have to play are unbelievable. I mean, you're talking 4 hours plus with no breaks and just ripping balls back and forth, where every shot is full acceleration and movement and all of that stuff. The pounding and the physicality into that, I think, is undersold by so many people. And as someone who loves the sport of tennis and plays it a lot, I can tell you, when you get even to any level, you realize how difficult the sport is just to keep things going. And most people just go out and slap the balls around a little bit, and they never get rallies going beyond a few shots here or there. That's not that hard, maybe. But to go out there and be able to hit 22 and 23 and 24 consecutive shots in a point, and then come right back and do it all over again, and do it all over again for 4 hours, and do it day after day or every other day in a Grand Slam for 2 weeks, that is physically and mentally exhausting. And there's no help. You can't tag out. You can't call a timeout. You don't get any of that stuff. It's just you out there going for it. And that, to me, is why Roger Federer has separated himself from a lot of sportsmen. And you can make other arguments, and obviously this is a very objective or subjective topic, in that there's a lot of nuance here. I mean, how do you truly compare Wayne Gretzky with Michael Jordan with Roger Federer? That's a difficult thing to do, for sure. But I think the dominance of Federer, now 15 years on the ATP Tour. It's been 14 years since he first won Wimbledon in 2003. To win it again now, 14 years later, at the age of 35, when most tennis players historically have hung up the tennis shoes and put up the racket, to still be playing at this level is absolutely mind-blowing. And to me, speaks to the greatness of Roger Federer. And, you know, the detractors out there will say that, well, what about Nadal? He's got 15 Grand Slams, and he's a little bit younger. Well, yes, he does have 15 Grand Slams, but 10 of them are on the French Open clay surface. He is undisputably the best singular player on a surface that we've ever seen. But here's the other thing about Federer. If it wasn't for Nadal at Roland Garros, Roger Federer wouldn't be a one-time French Open champion. He'd be a 6 or 7-time French Open champion, just like he's got 8 at Wimbledon and 5 at the US Open and 5 in Australia. He is arguably the second or third best clay court player of all time. He just happened to be in the era with the greatest of all time. I don't think he should be knocked for that. And the head-to-head, people will point to that. Nadal owns a head-to-head advantage. Well, the vast majority of those matches are on clay, where Nadal rules. When they've gone to other surfaces, Federer has largely won those matches over the course of his career. He, by the way, has won the last 4 of those matches, including the Australian Open title back in January. So even now, at what should be a progressing later stage in his career, he's now exacting revenge against his greatest rival and winning Grand Slam titles and 5 of 7 titles this year. It is simply remarkable what he is doing. And I think any of the detractors or the naysayers about individual stats like the French Open or like the head-to-head against Nadal, he's answering those emphatically with his play this year. And then all of the other numbers point in his favor. I think it's time we start talking about Roger Federer not just as the greatest tennis player of all time, but in the very, very short list of greatest athletes of all time. The beauty in his game is there, the style is there, the mannerisms are there, the swagger is there, and boy is the game there. And the titles are there too. Your thoughts on that? 737-7767 is the number tonight. We would love to hear from you on any topic. Phone lines are open, so call us up and be a part of the conversation. And we begin tonight with Brian. Brian, good evening.
I disagree with the gentleman from Nashville. I don't think he's the greatest tennis player of all time. I think the greatest tennis player of all time was Bjorn Borg, or maybe Jimmy Connors.
Okay.
Or maybe McEnroe. You know, I liked McEnroe's calling of the Wimbledon, and his older brother Patrick. I got an older brother Patrick, so I liked that a lot. That was pretty cool.
Well, I appreciate that, Brian, but there's no real argument you can make for either Connors or McEnroe in terms of greatest players of all time. Borg's an interesting one, but the biggest reason you can make the argument for Borg is dominance in a short period of time, and then he called his career early. He was done in his late 20s, and so much more maybe could have been won there, but that to me is what separates Federer. I mean, he got to the age of 30 when all of the guys before, like Borg and Laver and so many of those guys, quit. That's when they retired and they couldn't handle the physicality and the grind anymore. And Federer just kept on going and getting the quarterfinals and semifinals and finals. And he won a couple in there. And now this year, at 35 years of age, he's won 5 of the 7 tournaments he's entered, including the Australian Open and Wimbledon for an 8th time. That, to me, is what separates Roger Federer.
What about Pete Sampras?
Sampras is amazing, no question about it. But now, in any comparison with Federer, you've got a guy who's got 5 more slams than him now, 19-14, and now even more wins at Wimbledon, where it seemed like Sampras was going to be truly the all-time great when he won his 7th there to have 14 slams overall. People thought no one would ever touch those records. Now Federer's beaten them both. I don't see where the argument stacks up there. I think Federer is, both in longevity and singular greatness, the greatest tennis player of all time. And because of that, and because of the shape the sport is in right now, because that's the other thing. Sampras in his prime, there weren't a lot of great rivals for him. There were several solid players. Maybe the depth of the field slightly better than what we've seen during the Big Four era to a degree, but there were no huge rivals other than maybe Andre Agassi, who even himself had a sabbatical for a time, like you see in the Big Four era. These 4 guys have dominated tennis for a decade, and Federer has had to deal with Nadal and Djokovic and Murray in each and every tournament, and he's done it and won 19 Grand Slam titles. To me, that's enough said.
What about that German guy?
Boris Becker?
Yeah, what about him?
Well, he had a fine career, but he's not in this conversation.
Oh, okay.
All right, Brian, we appreciate the call. Thanks for playing along tonight. Feel free to come in. I'd love to entertain other thoughts on people like this as well. I mean, this is the great thing about sports, is we can debate these things ad nauseum and have a lot of fun with them. But to me, what Roger Federer continues to do, and the fact that he's doing it at this age, for this long in his career, and with the singular greatness that he has displayed, it's hard to make the arguments elsewhere now. He seems to just be the GOAT. 19 Grand Slams, 8 at Wimbledon. And you know what? He joked about it yesterday that he couldn't have imagined this season that he's had after, remember, taking the final 6 months of last year off to rehab that knee and the knee injury that he had. I don't think anybody could imagine him coming back and winning Australia right out of the gate, and then playing as well as he did on the American hard courts this spring, and then going over and winning Wimbledon this summer after taking off the entire clay court season. That is an incredible run considering where he was a year ago this time, limping off the court with an injury at Wimbledon. But you know what? He's now the favorite for the U.S. Open. If he's healthy and ready to go in Flushing Meadows, he's going to be the favorite over all those other guys. That's how well he's playing now. This wasn't a fluke. This isn't a guy coming back and lucking through the draw and winning. This is now 2 Grand Slams, the only 2 he's competed in this year. He's got a chance to be world #1 at the end of the year. Has a chance to win 3 of the 4 Grand Slams on the calendar. The only one he won't perhaps win is one that he didn't compete in. It's simply incredible what he has done this year. And it was so much fun to watch yesterday to just see it happen again and to see him celebrate and appreciate the moment, because he does. He appreciates how much the sport has meant to him and how much that court means to the sport. And you know that for a guy who's grinded as long as he has to stay out there on the court, that was a pretty sweet moment for sure. All right, phone lines are open. 737-7767 is the number. We want to hear from you tonight. Get in on the conversation. We'll talk some football as well. We'll get into John's conversation with Tennessee State head football coach Rod Reed coming up here shortly. Plus, that interesting story we talked about, the Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL, helping out the Independence High School football team. We'll get to that story as well coming up here on the program. Stay tuned. We're just getting started. You're watching SportsLine on News Channel 5+.